Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel, Cell and Gene Therapy Portfolio Strategies. We've got a great panel here, and I wanted to thank all the panelists for joining us in this kind of interesting virtual format that we're starting to get used to some degree. We have with us Claudia Mitchell, the SVP at Head of Portfolio Strategy at Astellas. We have Sanjay Singh, VP and Global Head, Janssen BioTherapeutics, Johnson & Johnson, and Anabella Villalobos, SVP BioTherapeutics and Medicinal Sciences at Biogen. We are looking forward to hearing more from all of you about how you look at your portfolios and how you strategize around them, and how your company and what we're doing here is talking to mid-sized pharma biotech to large pharma biotech. And how you manage those discussions and those decisions. I'm particularly excited about this. My name is Tzianabos, CEO of Homology Medicines. In my prior life, I spent almost 10 years at Shire prior to the acquisition by Takeda. And one of my roles there was head of strategic planning program management. So I was very involved in these discussions or these types of discussions in the company. And then later on became head of research and early development there. So I was on the other side of the equation. So I'm really looking forward to the current thinking of each of your companies and how you build your portfolios and maintain them. I thought I would go around, at least initially, and have everybody just briefly introduce themselves. I've given your title, but just a little bit of context around your background would really be helpful. And we can start with Anabella, if we can.
Yes, thank you, Arthur. So Anabella Villalobos, and actually I am currently at Biogen, where I head Biotherapeutics and Medicinal Sciences. Prior to joining Biogen about 3 years ago, I spent 28 years at Pfizer, where I was involved in neuroscience, primarily neuroscience, medicinal chemistry, and also enjoy other aspects of the neuroscience field while I was at Pfizer, and learned quite a bit about drug discovery and development. Thank you.
Great. Sanjay, would you like to give your background?
Yes, thank you, Sanjay Singh. I've been with Janssen, actually just completed my 4 years a week ago. Before that, I was at Boehringer Ingelheim, and before that, a small biotech company in Houston called Tzianabos. I've been in biologics all my life, largely in large molecule, but also I have been interested in blood-brain barrier and cell therapies and gene therapies, retinal diseases. So in Janssen, my group is responsible for all biologics that include cell therapy and gene therapy in terms of making the therapeutics. So what I like to say is that the things that actually go in patients, that's what we do. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And Claudia?
So I'm Claudia Mitchell, SVP of Portfolio Strategy at Astellas. I've been at Astellas for 2 years. Since my company, Universal Cells, got acquired by Astellas 2 years ago. So I'm a scientist entrepreneur. My background has been mostly first in academia, then in starting companies. And I've been in the field of cell and gene therapy for more than 20 years. So since I started my Ph.D. So I've seen it all, and it's so nice to see the evolution and see it actually becoming a reality, approved medicine. So that's very exciting.
Great. Well, again, I appreciate everybody's willingness to spend some time and take folks through this topic. It's, I think, a timely topic as more and more companies are delving into cell and gene therapies. Some have been there for a long, long time. Some are just starting to get into it. So I think this is going to be a great discussion. So I wanted to start out with our first question for Anabella around really what's the general process at Biogen for setting the portfolio strategy, and how does it work there? Who takes the lead? what departments are involved, who plays key roles, how does it go for you there? And then I'll ask the others to comment.
Sure. So I think it really starts with defining the disease area that you're going to be working on. And for Biogen, that area and that field is neuroscience. And then within neuroscience, I think we have to think about the diseases that you can target. And for our company, you know, that direction was set in part by the marketed products and in part by the areas that we want to grow into. So for example, multiple sclerosis, we also have neuromuscular, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ophthalmology, you know, some of the disease areas that get then, so okay, these are the major areas where we are going to work and dedicate resources to. Now, within the company, we have the research unit heads, which actually, you know, take the portfolio from idea to IND. And then we have the development unit heads, which is from phase 1 to phase 3 in the market. And these two folks, so the research unit heads and the development unit heads, get together and lay out then a roadmap or a strategy for one of these 5 major disease areas that Biogen works on. And then once that strategy and roadmap is laid out, then we identify targets within that disease area, and then groups like mine, Biotherapeutics and Medicinal Sciences, which is responsible for the modalities, partners with these research unit heads and development unit heads to think about how we're going to target those interesting disease areas. What modality are we going to use? Is it going to be a small molecule? Is it going to be gene therapy? And that is then how the portfolio gets set and developed at a company like Biogen.
Great. Any comments from Claudia or Sanjay on this? Any market differences on how you look at it?
I think in general, you know, that's very similar and probably for good reason.
My video is a little bit, so I don't know.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. So what I was saying is that, you know, it's not very different for good reasons, because this works for all large companies. These are complex problems, and then, you know, it is decided as a larger group. In Janssen, the therapeutic areas have the responsibility for the portfolio, and also they are end to end. So they are also responsible for marketed products. So that's the place normally the idea initiates or thinking initiates, and they're always looking after patients and unmet need. So they are the ones that kind of initiate, but once they initiate, then everybody, you know, including my group and downstream and marketing, everybody kind of gets together. So the small molecule and then large molecule, those are much easier decisions to be made. You know, cell therapies or gene therapies, we look for very specific way of like where the unmet need is, and what expertise do we have that we bring to the table that we should get into building this what we call a little bit complex therapies. It takes a little bit more than what we are used to, but that's how kind of patient unmet need is the key driver.
Claudia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, at Astellas, we have a little bit of a different approach. It's more a centralized approach. Again, the unmet medical need is always at the center, but we have my department portfolio strategy is really where the strategy gets defined, and we moved a few years ago from having a therapeutic area focused type of strategy to having a broader type of a strategic thinking and portfolio thinking. We have, instead of focusing on specific therapeutic areas, we wanted to really go for where innovation is, and we didn't want to be restricted to therapeutic areas. So we think that in order to address unmet medical needs, we need to think differently. We need to think outside the box. So we didn't want to be constrained by therapeutic areas. So we created what we call the focus area strategy approach. So we are looking at different combinations of biologies, modalities, addressing unmet medical needs. So we're not constrained in a certain therapeutic areas, but we leverage the biologies and modalities that we're developing at Astellas to address different unmet medical needs. And that's how we build our portfolio. It's around those expertise.
Great. That's really an interesting way to do it, and certainly a little bit different than the regular model. Let's move on to Sanjay. How often do you have a look at your portfolio, and what are the key things that would trigger a change in direction or a different tact? Is it a regular basis, or is it as needed?
So I think if you are specifically talking about gene therapy or cell therapy, we are constantly looking at on a very, very regular basis. In terms of we are very data driven, and we constantly monitor like where the scope is. So if you think of data coming from our clinical trials, and we are learning from our current molecules, like what is happening, and that starts to generate some interesting opportunities, those get addressed. There is an advantage of having end-to-end therapeutic areas because they want to dominate or own a given disease. So if there is an opportunity in that given disease where we see that, okay, there is something that is being left that can be, say, better addressed using cell therapy, definitely that becomes a part of that aggregated planning. So I would say we at least the discovery portfolio is consistently looked. Once we are in clinical trials, like we are very focused in kind of getting the outcome, but discovery portfolio is very, very regularly within therapeutic areas, being addressed. And groups like us, which are central, that work with all the therapeutic areas, we create a very good bridge in kind of spreading the information on the platform, or what we are learning from one therapeutic area or one program, and how can it be leveraged for other programs. So I think probably I'm giving you a very long answer, but short answer is very frequently.
Great, thank you. Anabella or Claudia, you guys have any commentary on that from your perspective?
Yeah, so I can offer some comments. I mean, I think that it's not going to be too much different either from Sanjay, but in general, I think research unit heads and development unit heads are always looking at the strategy and the portfolio that they have. I don't think that we necessarily do an overhaul of the overall strategic direction frequently. I think that maybe that's done. We looked at that overall strategy once a year, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't be doing course correction and, and starting or terminating other programs. And some of the factors that play into that have to be, they have to do with the nature of the target. So in the case of gene therapy, clearly targets a happy genetic driver will be really prime for gene therapy approaches. But also the competition, I think, plays a role in how we move a strategic roadmap for a particular disease area. And that's something that we are always thinking about when we have a portfolio analysis. So I think, it's some similarities with what Sanjay said as well.
Just moving on to the next question. Claudia, this is for you. In portfolio management, there are a number of criteria that a company would set up based on their approach. Most of them are quantitative in nature. Some of them are very formulaic in nature. ascribing a certain percentage to an unmet need, a disease, or a certain percentage to commercial. How do you look at it at Astellas in terms of qualitative versus quantitative? And has there ever been a time when you made an investment just based on qualitative versus quantitative because you wanted to get into a specific area because you wanted to learn more and be, as you commented earlier, at the forefront of a particular area?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we are dealing with every day, right? How do we put value on qualitative measures, and how do we actually can score things? So that's one of the things that several people in my department are working on. Is how do we translate the intangibles into a value so we can kind of quantify? So there is no science to it. It's more of an art, right? And especially if you go for assets that are earlier in the portfolio, it's very hard to put values. You can't use the NPV, for example, for early projects. You're losing that. So for later stage projects, it's much easier. But for early stage, it's very hard to grasp where the value is and it put real numbers. And to answer your second question is like, have we ever done investments, made investments based more on what we thought and not quantitative? Yeah, absolutely, especially for earlier assets. It's very hard to quantitate all the synergies and all the intangibles and put a real value. So yes, I think that it's an art more than a science. But it's a struggle, and we're always, as a scientist, I'm always trying to put numbers, right? And trying to see, well, does it really justify? But in the end, it's going to be a subjective, and what we really think, the vision and how he fits, right? More than numbers.
Any commentary or reactions to that?
In general, can't disagree on that, that where you can create value, or how can you see the value. One thing I noticed in Janssen that we constantly look for what questions or why we are wanting to do it. What are we trying to address, and how will we know? It's not the how big the question is, but how critical that question is in, again, our therapeutic area strategy. If you look at, we have a BCMA CAR-T and then BCMA CD3, and both data have been shown. And there is a thinking that how we comprehensively going to treat that disease. And in oncology, for example, you are not going to be looking into one probably be able to give you everything. So is one going to help us with some supplementary or additional therapies, or how you give overall better value to patients? So it's more about, as I said, answering a specific question, and not the other way, but if you were asking about, in a sense that qualitative or quantitative means compromising the potency or something like that, that's a different question. So I was thinking probably you were going in that direction, but maybe not.
If I could add Arthur in here too. So I think, yes, qualitative and quantitative parameters always play a role, but I would say that it is very important, and this is very true for Biogen, is to keep the patient at the center, okay? It's really all about the patient and providing some really meaningful breakthrough medicines for them. And I think that if you think about products like Spinraza, for example, for spinal muscular atrophy, or some of the late phase programs that we have today for patients with ALS, okay? These are probably areas that for some companies could be considered a smaller market relative to markets like, for example, like Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's, but clearly the patient was very important. There was no real treatments, no real treatment for these patients. And that's what drove the decision. It was that medical need and the patient at the center of the considerations. So, and I think this is really a very rewarding, I think, way to think about medicines and what we're going to discover and develop.
That's a great point. And I think you picked two therapeutic areas that, certainly there's a huge unmet need in those areas. So over to you, Anabella, again. And this is a juicy, meaty topic, which I used to wrestle with all the time, which is internal versus external BD. And how does Biogen think about that? You've had some acquisitions over the years. So just curious, and this often, as you know, changes almost yearly, where the focus is going to be, at least in most companies that I've dealt with. What is it looking like for you right now?
Yeah, so so I think that's a very interesting question. And the way I like to think about external versus internal is, how can you leverage them so that they actually complement each other? Okay. And to me, that's probably one way to think about internal versus external investment. So if you have internal investment in a particular disease area, then I think it makes a lot of sense to look for opportunities externally that complement what you have. If you don't have anything that is very advanced, for example, in a given disease area, it's a perfect opportunity to try to acquire a late clinical asset, something in phase 2 or phase 3. So you mentioned recently, we acquired Nightstar, and it was really a big way for us to get our ophthalmology gene therapy effort going, okay? But that made a lot of sense. We were just starting to build the internal effort in gene therapy, and that kind of was a shot on the arm for Biogen to bring that and think about that external acquisition. So I see them, I think, as something that we should do in a complementary fashion based on what you have internally. Or not.
I'd be very interested to hear from Sanjay and Claudia on this point, because I think, everybody thinks about this differently. So, Sanjay?
Okay. So Janssen and Johnson & Johnson in general, if I think of, they see world as a laboratory, and innovations happen all over, and so we kind of really focus on what's the innovative side, like what, again, going back to as before was discussed, is that patients need. And if there is a innovation that allows us to help, then we don't hesitate, and we do it at all kinds of different stages. The key part is it innovative, or is it something that is going to fit with our overall strategy in addressing that given disease or area that we are interested in. So, if external asset or externally innovated thing is better than what we have, we definitely will go and take the best that we can get. So, like, not only innovation, but also the best that we can get our hands on.
Great. Claudia, how about at Astellas? How do you think about it?
I think we think a little bit, like Anabella described, but also a little bit of Sanjay. It's a mix. I think that there is first we look at our portfolio and see what are the opportunities to leverage what we have and build upon it. Are there any gaps? Can we build upon it? So that's one main focus. And also the synergies, the business synergies, especially for later assets. I think that we're looking, in terms of business opportunities, we need to look at these. We need to look at those things too. And mind, especially since we don't have therapeutic area focus, we are really open to innovation in many fields, and not necessarily on the areas we are looking at. And I think that, for example, a few years ago, we made the decision at Astellas to invest in cell and gene therapy. And it was something that, Astellas historically has been very focused on small molecules and biologics, but, we made a decision to be innovative. Innovativeness is a very, very important thing. So we're not afraid in venturing into new areas and really looking for where we think we are going to be, be able to address most unmet medical needs. And we saw cell and gene therapy as a great opportunity to really bring innovation to patients and address before. So I think that that's a big draw, and Astellas is really committed to the field of gene and cell therapy.
Right. Very insightful views by everybody on that, because it's always a hot topic. Next question for you, Sanjay. When you sit down and map out from a portfolio perspective what you're going to do, what's the process for you and Janssen overlaying the resource requirements and the budgeting? How does that process work there for you guys? Does one drive the other or vice versa?
No, it is always a balance. And it's a complicated art in a sense that we have really good people who know various aspects, and it's always a team thing, that basically helps with this whole understanding of this process. And depending on how big it is, it can be a much bigger discussion or it can be a smaller discussion. And many times, depending on, again, it's different stages drive different level of engagement, but overall, the process is, again, we are creative-driven company. So patients, and then, how it helps patients, and how big the investment will be, and then likelihood of success. So good balance of risk and the benefit that can comes in play. So the passion largely comes from our therapeutic areas, because our physicians are really they know their patients, and they really drive that discussion around unmet need and how the program can fit. Budget is definitely a part of the discussion, and how many people will it take. But if, as a company, we believe that it's a problem worth addressing, and really, we believe in that we understand what's going on, I think a lot of adjustments are made consistently to kind of take something that we consider very interesting.
Great. Any commentary from Claudia or Anabella around that one?
I think from what Sanjaya was, all the different aspects that he was laying out, we try to put into almost an algorithm on how to prioritize projects. It's very hard, but we try to systematize that, and every year we'll go through the budgeting process, and we have the priorities internally, but taking into account a lot of different factors and that Sanjay mentioned. It's the same thought process, but we try to put it to a spreadsheet, but not always easy.
Yeah, so I agree, Claudia, that it's not always easy, but I do think that prioritization is an important aspect of how we think about resource allocation and budgets. Mm-hmm. I think that for any company, nobody really has infinite resources or money. And I think that if we really want to deliver and make a difference in the lives of patients, then we need to focus some of those efforts. And probably the one of the ways in which you can do that is to just prioritize. Clearly, the process by of doing that can be difficult and challenging. But I do think that we have gotten to a good point where we can prioritize and thus, make decisions and allocation of resources.
Great, thank you. Claudia, this one's for you.
And just wanted to Arthur, if I may just
Please,
jump on something that Anabella said. I just wanted to comment on what you said about the importance of prioritization. You said no company has all the means. The one thing that I see a difference, and I keep stressing that at Astellas, and I think that it's a big difference from a biotech to a pharma. Pharma has a lot of money to put into research, and I think sometimes the fact that we have too much money in pharma compared to a biotech makes that we are not as focused. And as you mentioned, Anabella, it's very important to focus. If we want to move forward, the focus is very important. So in a bigger company, I think prioritization is a very healthy exercise, because we do have more money in bigger companies and in biotech. And I think one of the key things in biotech for success is the very laser sharp focus that drives biotech, because otherwise you don't meet the milestones. So I think that it's a key thing that if pharmas could focus and prioritize more, I think they would be more efficient in their R&D.
So Claudia, like in a nice way, saying that the big companies don't know what they're doing, huh?
No. Too much money. That's all.
It's not like what I have found, and again, I have worked in smaller companies. The thing which I really enjoy at Janssen is the physicians, is the therapeutic area has who know the patient and the disease, and what's going to be really helpful. So I think more end user thinking largely drives our thinking, that if it's going to solve that and it's going to help and it's going to make comprehensive. So we don't use word prioritization and as often as you suggest probably we should be using, but more in decision making, like how can we get to a place where when we know whether it's going to help or not, and how quickly can we get to that point in a more smart way. So that's where a lot of our thinking goes. And if you want to call prioritization, our thinking is get the data in a very prudent but very well designed way, and then let it drive our decisions.
Actually, if I could add, Arthur, let me just jump in here, is that actually if you look at the trend in large pharma, I mean, over the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of large pharma, actually they have started to focus the disease areas that they work on. This is probably true across many of them, where, maybe 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the large pharma was working on 15 different disease areas, and now they have exited some areas. You hear about that all the time, so they're bringing more focus. So a lot of them are actually much more focused on 5 or 6 disease areas versus the 15 that they used to carry, in part because they have made priorities, I think, and because then that puts their budget in a much more focus, and they can make more of a difference in those disease areas that they decided to stay on. So it's happening in both small and large companies.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to move to next question, and a couple of you have mentioned this already in your comments. It's how you think about risk. And I'm going to throw this to Claudia first, in terms of how do you manage risk across the portfolio, and then you have the option to say whether or not you're required to put an ENPV on your preclinical pipeline, because that's a little bit of a I would say my own personal distaste when I was told I had to do this, even though you're talking about an early discovery project and you have no idea what the probability of success is going to be, and yet forced to do that as part of the portfolio discussion and decision. And even one step further, what's the commercial opportunity around a given project when it's a preclinical project? So how do you think about that? How did you grapple with that? Because I'd love to hear, and then I can share with you how I did, which is basically I refused to do it, which is why I'm at a small company now. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Who did you ask this question? Who has to take it first?
Yeah, no, so
Claudia.
Claudia,
Okay.
we're having a little trouble hearing you.
yeah, no, it's my internet connection is not that great, but let's see if it works now. But my take on this is, as you say, in the early stage, you have to have the vision, some elements, but you can't be putting too much, granularity, because there's so many unknowns that it needs to make sense. You need to be telling a compelling story. You need to have a potential market that is addressable and a big picture, right? So we have, in terms of risk in the portfolio, we have we try to have a diverse pipeline with projects with different, as far as we can tell, right? And but there is nothing low risk. We're in a high risk business, right? So it would be an illusion to think that we control everything. So what I tell my people is like, we don't need to have 100% certainty and collect every single data point, because you are contributing to, it's a false sense of accuracy there, because your data points early on are not very accurate. So you have to have the big picture, but you can't you can't quantify risk at that point, and you shouldn't. It's a waste of time. You have to believe in the stories and play with the rest of your portfolio, having things that are more mature, and that's how you build a healthy portfolio and well-being at this point.
Any comments?
And I hope that my connection was good enough that you got the gist of my.
We got the gist of it. How about Anabella or Sanjaya?
Yeah, so I think we all have to take risks. We just cannot have a portfolio where we play to targets or areas where there are products in the market and all we're going to try to do is to do a best-in-class approach. I don't think, I think we need to take risks. I really believe in that. And it has to be a balance, I think, of innovative, more risky approaches, but that could, if they pan out, you can win really big and be moving forward and paving the way with a first-in-class agent. I, for example, think that, Biogen probably took a risk when they decided to invest in Spinraza and take it to the market, and a risk that perhaps other companies would have not taken, taking an intrathecal administration in a pediatric population. Not every company would have taken that risk. So I do think that you need to balance that and take the risk. So with regard to your point around the ENPV for early projects, that is very, very difficult and a very challenging ask. So I kind of agree with you on that. But one way of approaching it is to think about it is we can calculate an ENPV for a very early project. It's not going to be very accurate. It's not really going to capture the true potential because it's so early. But however, you have to put it in context of the overall strategy for that disease area, okay? And I think that is how you can overcome some of the low numbers for, that may come up with an EMPD. You put it in terms of, this is the overall strategy that we have. We have products in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. This is more risky, but it fits the strategy. This is the direction that we want to go. It's going to help us address something. And I think when you have that kind of conversation, then you can overcome a very low number. So, that's just one way of thinking about it too, Arthur.
Sanjay?
So I think, Janssen, I'm just trying to reflect when my colleagues were talking. So when it comes to early projects, I think we have a lot of leverage because of focus on innovation constantly. And in overall scheme, they don't, make a much bigger proportion. So I think we have, as a scientist, that's something I have enjoyed, and my teams enjoy, is that early innovation discovery is not scrutinized as much as the late portfolio is. And largely, the value that company looks into is more definitive later stage projects that are all counted. And very much, not much value is counted for the early portfolio. So I think that's a good thing in a sense that allows a lot of ideas to be tested and kind of taken towards preclinical. But once it's preclinical and big scale ups have to happen and bigger investment, I think those discussions happen. I've been here 4 years, and I have kind of seen is that somehow Janssen has done it so well. Like leaders have figured it out, like how they talk and how do they do the calculation. I find myself fortunate, but also very impressed with the leadership. I think they're very seasoned and have been doing it for some time. So I don't see that as a hindrance in our ability to discover or innovate, at least in early stages.
Just Arthur, I just wanted to make a comment on the
Please.
ENPV for early stage day weather forecast. It's meaningless.
Yeah, and that's why we don't do it.
Okay, last question, and whoever wants to jump in, we'll make it a free-for-all here. This is a final Jeopardy round. Kind of a two-part question, which is, what advice would you have for a small emerging company that is, looking to expand or even partner, from your perspective? In addition, what is the role of a champion at your companies? Do you need a champion who's sticking their neck out and willing to take folks on a particular company or strategy or whatever? Do you think that there's still that mindset at your companies? Just curious how folks are thinking about it these days.
Maybe looks like I'll go first then. I was waiting.
Okay, I was waiting to see.
So champions make big difference. Passionate people who have read, understood, and know in depth can make a big difference. So if you can find a champion who resonates with what you are trying to do, in bringing into forefront or like having a serious discussion makes a big difference. We definitely have a strategy. We definitely have planned. Therapeutic areas are constantly looking into their bigger questions. They are answering any opportunities that can help with that. Or also they are in general looking for innovation that is out there and that is directed towards solving a specific problems or unmet need. They are looking, and if you have something like that, if you can bring it, that definitely gets attention in Janssen. But if you have a champion on top of that, that makes a big difference, because that can force a little bit much bigger discussions, and then can bring champions internally know, who to bring in, and who to kind of involve in having that more in-depth discussion quickly. But overall, what I see in Janssen is that since we are so driven in finding innovation, nothing is not, ignored. And sometimes we say that we do too much of constantly, like looking at external world or smaller companies, or people who have ideas, and we spend considerable amount of time evaluating that. So if you think you have something else, bring it to Janssen's attention. You will get a reasonably good look at it from our company. If it fits with our strategy, you will get a pretty in-depth discussion very quickly. But champions still make a difference.
If I could follow up, Arthur, on that a little bit. So to your first question, if you have a small company and you're looking to grow or expand or partner, I would say, focus on having really robust and solid science on what to do. I think that if you communicate that, and you may not have necessarily a perfect asset that goes along with that target, but if your science is robust and people can see that you can get to a good molecule, I think that goes a long way for really enhancing the possibilities of finding partners. But with regard to champions, I totally agree with Sanjay. I think you need champions. And actually champions are critical, because usually there are people who are very passionate and knowledgeable in the area that they take on and that they want to drive forward. The one thing that I would say is that a champion also needs to be objective. And a good champion will know when to drive and when to push a project, and also when to stop, take a pause, or even terminate a project. And that's what I look for in a good champion, is somebody who can objectively really drive the science and be passionate about it and be able to sell it and bring others in it, but also kind of know when it's time to stand down from an opportunity.
Claudia, we'll throw it over to you, but I wanted to add a twist to the question for you, which is, okay, talk about the role of the champion, but does it matter who it is in the organization, and if they've been there a long time, and where they live in the organization, in your mind?
Well, yeah, let me comment on the three things in terms of the, how the early the companies can reach out, what they can do. I think that building relationships as early as possible and finding that champion as early as possible. I think that it's very important, because it's good for the company to follow the progresses of the smaller company, and so it's good to build the relationship. And the champion is important also for the question of timing, because the companies will have one-off relationships, right? And if you have a champion, the champion is seeing internally what is happening with the company and how the strategy is going, and how the internal projects are evolving. So it's very important to have an insider who is seeing all that and can be the person there to speak, be the spokesperson for you, because you don't know. You're coming once in a while to touch base with BD, right, as a small company. But the champion is there. So it's very important because of the timing there too. And in terms of the right person to be the champion, I think that I personally don't think that the title matters. I think that, of course, having a person who is higher up in the organization may help and may open more doors, because the person is more connected and sees more. But having somebody passionate who understands and really buys into your science is the most important thing, I believe, in a champion.
Any other commentary on that last question?
Yeah, I would agree with Claudia. I don't necessarily think that a title makes a champion. I personally think that there are a couple of things that I look for. One of them is credibility. A champion has to have credibility within the organization, outside the organization, or convey himself or herself in such a way that they convey that credibility. I think that's critical, because then that takes you to the second point, is if they're credible, then they're able to influence. And you can influence from any chair. You don't need a title to do that, but you need to be credible to be able to influence. People need to know that you're going to be objective. Then they're going to listen to what you have to say.
Great point.
Great point. So I think that concludes our time. Thank you, Anabella, Claudia, Sanjaya, for making the time this evening and this morning, in the case of Claudia. And really appreciate your participation in this session. And I think it was a real lively discussion and really helpful. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.